If you're a radio person, you're always a radio person. It never quite leaves your mindset.
Stephen Walter-Gerrard's love for radio began at a very early age.
I would race home from school and I would hit my cassette player record. I'd clean up the kitchen and then I'd go back to my room and listen to it all.
But one magic moment in a radio studio made him a radio person.
He said, that was your first crossfade, don't let it be your last.
After kicking goals on air, in programming and as a creative, Stephen was then left wondering what his next step would look like.
I just thought, I wonder what would happen if I could dedicate all of this creativity to one company.
And in the next leg of his career, he discovered something about everything that came before.
All of the skills that I had spent 20 years developing are all directly transferable.
But there's one thing that should never be transferred.
Your definition of success is for you, not for anybody else. Stop handing your happiness over to other people.
May your best years be ahead of you. I'm Andy Marr, and this is Off Mic, Life After Radio. Stephen Walter-Gerrard is a former announcer, voice artist, creative writer and content director, who's now a marketing manager and self-confessed data nerd. After a bunch of different roles in different radio markets, Stephen took what he learnt into the corporate world. These days he gets to write stuff in his LinkedIn bio like executive engagement leader for scale-up growth strategy and established orgs in highly regulated environment. Yeah, he works with people who know what that means. Importantly though, he makes a point of working with companies that do good in the world. I know what that means. Stephen is one of the good ones. Stephen, great to see you, mate. Thanks for joining us.
Likewise. Man alive, it's been a while.
It has been. You and I worked together at 3AW. I couldn't remember the year now. It must be like 2016, 17. You were there for a bit as a writer. And was that your last radio gig?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
And you were doing little bits on Magic too, which is the sister station.
That's right. Yeah. So writing Monday to Friday, then Magic for like across the eastern seaboard on weekends.
Yeah.
I even did a Christmas Day there once, which was really cool. That was great fun.
Oh, awesome. Magic, for people who aren't familiar with the format, was an easy listening music station for the most part.
Oh, it was great. It was like 3MP, which is my last dream station. I grew up listening to 3MP.
Oh, yeah.
And I think one day, if I can just get one shift on 3MP, I think my radio career will have the cherry on top. But Magic was like 3MP, but like a bit more party music. So it was 3MP on the dance floor.
What was the attraction of 3MP to you?
I grew up listening to 3MP in Lara. So every morning getting ready for school for my entire childhood, it was on every morning. And it was just brilliant. I loved it.
So you grew up on the other side of the bay from 3MP, which is in Mornington, or servicing the Mornington area largely, and you were over the other side of Port Phillip Bay, which is generally sort of the Geelong area, but Lara being a bit north of that.
Yes, right at the foot of the Yangs.
That's where you grew up, and what got you into radio?
I've got a bone to pick with Tony Martin if ever I'm lucky enough to meet him, because it's his fault.
Yeah.
And little did I know what I was in store for in the commercial radio industry. But I would race home from school, so the bus would get into the Six Ways at about 8 minutes past 4, and the show had already started, and I would run home to catch the first sketch, which was about 13, 14, maybe 17 minutes past 4, something like that, because it was only a few blocks down the road. And I would hit my cassette player record. I'd record the sketch, then I would go and do all my chores for the afternoon. I'd come back for their 10 past 5 interview.
Yeah.
And then
You knew the formatting even then. That's amazing.
Yeah, I was obsessed. So, yes, I'd record the interview, then I would go and set the table.
Yeah.
And then I'd record the last sketch at about 5 to 6 o'clock if they were bothered to run on time. And then I'd have tea, I'd clean up the kitchen, and then I'd go back to my room and listen to it all over and over and over again. And I've still got somewhere in a box in the shed shopping bags just full of cassettes of Martin Malloy.
So that was your interest in radio. And then what got you started? Where was your first radio gig?
First radio gig was Triple M Sydney.
Way to start.
Yeah.
That's where I ended.
Yeah. It was an enormous blessing. So I had been accepted into the Australian Army, and I had my bags packed. They sent me the letter saying, you're going to Puckapunyal in 2 weeks. Here's what you need to pack. Then I got a call from the Army doctor who said, we know we've offered you the position for Puckapunyal and then Duntroon, which
in
is
Canberra.
Yes, that's right, Officers Academy or something. And he said, I'm so sorry to do this, but I've missed something on your file. You suffer from hay fever. And I said, yes. And he said, so what's the first thing you're going to get when you jump out of a tank in the long grass? I said, probably hay fever. And I said, but there's sprays. I've got Rhinocort. Does that count? And he said, it's the one thing, the position came down between you and one other person. So that broke my heart.
God help me. I know. Sorry, I had to say it.
It was a blessing in disguise, because I think it was about 12 to 18 months later, if I had been successful, I would have found myself jumping out of planes as a paratrooper in East Timor. And my sister Liz said, we've just moved to Sydney. We want to start a company called Crisco Hampers. So we started Crisco Hampers Australia in Sydney from her spare room, and that grew. And then one day she said to me, what are you doing here? And I was like, I'm doing the PDC forms. They've got to be at the bank by 3:30. She said, no. I mean, what are you doing here? What do you want to do? It's like, I always wanted to do radio. And she said, oh, of course. And she said, you're not to work for the rest of the day. You're to go through the white pages and call every single radio station from top to bottom on that list and find a gig. And so I just called them up and I said, do you have any volunteer work available? Little did I know that was like, of course they did, free labour. And they said, you can come and start in what was called the comm switch on weekends, where people would call up.
Yes, I did comm switch.
The what's on the weekends. A guy was running it and he said, whatever you do, don't speak to the announcers. And I wondered, why not? So I went to the kitchen, got a coffee, and saw a news article that Ronnie Sparks had won some survey, like 1 million surveys in a row or something like that. And I went through the airlock and very meekly knocked on his door and said, you don't know me, I'm just a kid in the comm switch this weekend, but I just want to say congratulations on the survey win. That's all I wanted to say. And he was like, why don't any of you come and speak to us? I said, we're not allowed to. He said, get in here. And so he sat me down at the panel and my heart was out my chest. And he said, when I point here, pull this fader down. When I point here, pull this fader up. And I did it. And he said, that was your first crossfade. Don't let it be your last.
That's amazing.
One Friday, Gretel Colleen came in.
Yeah.
And I had no idea who she was until she started speaking. And I was I hear this lady every day. It turned out that in that ad, they needed a second voice that they hadn't planned for. And Gretel said, well, why don't you get this kid? And she pulled me into the voiceover booth and she gave me my first ever voice acting lesson.
Amazing.
And that was when Phil heard it. I was on Ugly Phil's Hot 30 as Big Balls 4 nights a week on the Hot 30. And I'm like, this is the dude that I listened to every single night. I fell asleep at 10:30 after the Hot 30 finished.
Ugly Phil was the king of nights. And yeah, for a while, like not much else was going right with that network, but they had Ugly Phil at night and yeah, and a really, really great guy.
Yes, excellent human being to be in a radio station with.
I've had the misfortune of having have lost both my mother and my father. After both, he was one of the few people who reached out and said, mate, I know you're doing it tough and I'm here if you ever want to talk. That's the kind of guy Ugg is, and he's a real gem. And the way his life and career is going at the moment, he's got some health hassles, well, worse than hassles. It's quite unfortunate, but he is handling it like a mobster. And yeah, I love the dude. And he just seems to be in a beautiful place right now, and I'm really, really couldn't be more happy for him.
That's sensational. I love hearing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then after that, I applied. They said, "What do you really want to do?" I said, "I want to be a jock." And they said, "You got to go to the country." And so off I went to Cooma, to XL and Snow FM.
Ah, wow, yeah.
Then I went to Tamworth, 92.9, 2TM.
You became content director there, right?
Yes. So I started on the Request show, which was 10 till 2. Then I went to Drive. I was 21 and they gave me my own Drive show. So I did Drive, music director, breakfast, then content director for both stations.
How long were you there?
About 11 years.
Wow.
Then from Tamworth, it was a gig on Rock 95, Barrie, Ontario.
Oh, you worked Canadian radio, did you?
Just down the line. Weirdly, they wanted me to do the imaging in a Canadian accent, but do the tracking as me, and they just called me. It was like something from Australia or Steve-O from Australia or something like that.
Steve-O, yeah,
which was yeah.
It's a beautiful thing when you can just use the country you were born in as a character. I did the same thing in Calgary. I was Andy the Aussie.
It's a license to really say whatever you like, and they go, "Oh, it's okay, he's Australian." Yeah, and then I went to Good News Week as a writer.
You and I met when you were a writer. So was this your first full-time writing gig after being on air?
Well, everyone's got multiple jobs, particularly in
not full-time.
Regional radio. So I'd been writing for a while, but no, that was my first sit down at 9, clock out at 5, write and be funny job.
Yeah.
Ian Simons, beautiful dude, nature's gentleman, looked after me. He was like, go over to the cafe and just write in the sunshine. And he knew what creativity really meant to people.
That's a rare breed of manager that can actually look after the bottom line of the business, which of course is important, but fostering creativity is something that not everybody gets.
Particularly top brass in radio stations, absolutely not.
So who would you say would be your the best manager that you've worked with?
There are two, and I refuse to split. So my first best ever manager was Steve Gunther in Tamworth. The nicest, cleverest, most considerate manager you could hope for. But there was just something in his eyes where he missed nothing. And then I had Viv Hatsey at 3AW. Fast forward many, many years.
Yeah.
And I mean, come on, for a boss like Viv, it was like I was tiptoeing through the tulips. Like you just got supported and heard and looked after and questioned and challenged. It was like she'd read the book Radical Candor without reading the book Radical Candor. Like she cared personally and challenged directly. Amazing.
Now, Stephen, we've just had a text come through from the general manager. If we don't follow the Dan format, we'll both be back on volunteering on the community switchboard. Can you help us out? Can you get us to an ad break? What have you got?
And that'd be Sheena Easton catching that morning train, 9 to 5. Coming up in the next 15 minutes here on your home of easy listening, Phil Collins with You Can't Hurry Love. Or maybe you can, with a net worth of $350 million. But first, traffic and weather together here on 1377, 3 MP.
I was about to say you got the job and then you screwed up the station. I love it.
Didn't make probation. Stuffed it. Send us your new demo, mate.
Still to come in this chat with Stephen Walter-Gerrard. He's got some amazing things to say about the definition of success. He'll tell us what he misses and doesn't miss about radio and how a mistake with a cart machine led to an on-air mistake for the ages.
You're listening to the coverage of 2TM's... And I was just like, oh, no.
So 3AW would have been your last radio gig then. Why did you leave?
It was 20 years, and when you get into writing and then you realize that campaigns are really fun when you've got a client budget attached.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, I don't want to do anything else on air. I needed another shift, like I needed a cold sore. I appeared on some other, late night shifts across AW, and I thought, you know what, I'm not getting that valve release that pulling a shift used to give me. And I was having a lot of fun writing and doing campaign strategy. However, I had 10, 15 clients in rotation at any given time. And I just thought, I wonder what would happen if I could dedicate all of this strategic thinking, execution planning, and creativity to one company.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got another best mate. He just happens to be one of Australia's, preeminent genius cyber and information security doyens. I don't like using the word freak, but the guy is insanely good. And he said, I've got an idea. And I went, this is going to be good. And he told me what his idea was for a piece of technology and what it could do. But I don't know how to market it. I need a marketer. And I was like, do you want me to? And he said, yeah, that's kind of why I brought it up. I was like, all right, good. No problem. And I was like, this is something that I could contribute to quietly. And so we started up the company together. And in 12 months, we were bought out by another company who also didn't happen to have a marketing plan to lean on at all. So I sussed them out and it looked and sounded good. So I was a foundational ELT member of that company.
ELT meaning?
Executive leadership team. There's a wanky acronym. This is the world in which I live now. Yeah. But it was great. We made a name for ourselves and a footprint, and I was doing content and I was being creative and writing. And it just dawned on me that all of the skills that I had spent 20 years developing in radio and a little bit of TV are all directly transferable to a panoply of other industries. I want to say every other industry, but I don't have enough experience in every other industry. But in every industry I've gone to since or had any involvement in, even in any other contract work that I've done under my own name, it's all transferable. If you are naturally curious, you'll figure a lot of stuff out. And when a company says we need a plan to make some noise in the market and increase our share of voice, then you go, I'm your person. Because I know how to write, present, host, edit, build, strategize. I know how to look at an audience. In radio, you're obsessed with people's behavior because you're trying to find a way to pull on their earlobes from the speaker that's somewhere near them. And so you have this real kind of investigatory, journalistic bone in your body that actually cares to find some stuff out, which is gold on the ceiling when it comes to marketing in any other arena outside of radio. And then I was there for a few years, then decided to take some time off and renovate our family home that we bought. And since then, I've just stayed in technology.
Is that where the grey beard came from?
Yes. This is the third house I've renovated.
My dude.
Ever again.
Oh man, I'm working on my first, and it's just wiping me.
I don't think I've ever sworn so much.
What sin did you commit in a previous life to renovate 3 houses?
You always think you're better than you are, so there's a bit of hubris that I fall into from time to time, and think, yeah, I could do that. Why not?
Well, it's also getting the quote back from the trades that go, "Oh, you want how much?"
Yeah.
So after you finished renovating, you then went back into the workforce, still working in security, in cybersecurity?
Yes, in a manner of speaking. So in the tech world, which is where I've been and where I still am since leaving radio, it's fit to burst with cowboys who think that their technology solution is the next unicorn.
Yeah.
And have you ever said the words, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you didn't hate to be the bearer of bad news? You actually rather enjoyed being the bearer of bad news?
Yeah.
It was that. I was in a very fortunate enough position to take a long time to find my next gig. One day I saw a job ad on LinkedIn for a company called SOPE, S-O-P-E. I was like, what's this? This looks like tech, but it also looks like professional services consulting. I've done both, and this company did both. And I showed my other half, Suzanne, the job ad. Mm-hmm. And Suzanne said, that looks like you've written it. I was like, yeah. Like, this is as if this is like I wrote my own job, position description. And we had a very, very brief chat, 5 minutes. And after that, I was like, I really, really, really want to work for this dude. It's like walking into the Wonka factory and just going, man, get me on that boat. This is amazing. Yeah.
So what do you miss about radio?
What I miss is writing. See, when you're in marketing and working for other companies, you have a bandwidth of subject matter that you can cover, and there's limitations. But back in the old days when I had my own show, I could genuinely write a segment about whatever I wanted and find jokes and stories and the narrative in there wherever I wanted and however I wanted. This sounds very selfish, I'm sorry, but I could come up with the ideation, the writing, I could perform it, and I could edit it, produce it and publish it all by myself from end to end. Now, I do that to this day in these jobs, but it's not like I can see a story in the news and go, I'm going to write a sketch about that and make people laugh. I make content at the moment that makes people laugh, but those people that are laughing are part of that company's audience, not a broad radio audience where you can tap into for that. And there is something special about getting off air off a 3, 4 or 6 hour shift, and you're absolutely pissing in sweat because you've just spent the last few hours giving that shift absolutely everything that you had. And you call it whatever you want. You were tight and bright. You were in the pocket. You hit the post. You know when you nailed the shift. You know when you hit the perfect timeout. And no one but you cares about that, but you do, and it makes you so happy.
Yeah.
And you walk out and you go, I did an awesome thing there. And that's why it is so nice when you have an audience that calls you up for no reason other than to speak to you. And they were like, I loved that song. I haven't heard it for ages. I'm like, in my head, I'm like, that's called a spike track. That's what we do.
Yeah.
Or you were able to have a block of about a 15-minute block in your hour where you know that you set a mood. Call it Brian Ford's wall of sound or whatever he called it back in the day, but you did something from a programming perspective that they didn't know was happening to them. It's magic. It's like performers on stage in stand-up comedy or actors in TV and movie shows or whatever. You've done something to someone and for someone. They don't know how you did it, but they felt it. I think that's a little bit of what I miss. And my heart breaks because I think that if I went back into radio, I couldn't do that anymore. Not out of a lack of skills, more so out of how radio is today. Whether the room is there to even achieve that connection anymore.
So what don't you miss about radio?
I don't miss the spinning plates campaign strategy for 10 to 15 clients. Multiple briefs at once or terrible briefs or really pushy salespeople are par for the course. But I would take that any day to have worked in an industry, to have worked in a radio industry that wasn't full of vacuous, fame-seeking assholes who would step over their own mother to advance their own careers. I go to the stations and I go, who's that? Oh, that's blah blah's niece. It's like, oh, really? And what does she do? Oh, she's exec producer. I'm sorry, what? Fresh out of second year university. And I was like,
Seen it.
what are we talking about here? But just the sheer bullshit where you jump on a conference call and they go, you're off the radar. Like, this show doesn't need that. It needs this. And I'm like, do you live here? Do you speak to the listeners every day? Do you drive around town and see what the issues are? Or did you just look up the newspaper's headlines from today 34 seconds before you picked up this call to give me my air check? I could see the cogs in their minds. They were thinking to themselves, whatever you do, don't work out that I actually don't know what I'm doing. Everyone's good at everything and no one's better than anybody else. And whatever you do, don't work out that I may not know absolutely everything or I may not know how to do a certain thing. And I was like, oh, I get it. Mistakes are stigmatized where you are. I see.
Yeah, sucked for them though. Fear of failure, such a huge thing, not just in radio, but one thing that is unique to radio on the other side of the coin is the way that we define success. There really only seems to be that one way. You've got to get a job on major market radio to show everyone you've done it. You get a job on a station like Fox FM. That'll show them. It's pretty pervasive, isn't it?
Why is being on Fox your definition of success? Your definition of success is for you, not for anybody else. Stop handing your happiness over to other people. You are surrendering a part of yourself and giving this other person all of the power over your own happiness. Your self-worth is not graded on what station you work at and on what show and who with and blah, 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 which is why when I'm older, I would really love to just be able to pull one shift on 3MP. That would make my that's the cherry on the icing on the cake.
Yeah.
Just as a personal achievement, because it'd be right going back to when I was 8 years old. But to have the honour of saying that call sign, and just give me an hour, just give me 1 hour, give me 4 15-minute killer blocks.
Yeah.
And let me do it.
What was your biggest on-air or just general radio stuff up?
Oh. How badly can I swear?
Go ahead.
The worst stuff up I made was we had carts when I was starting out.
Yep, the actual physical cartridges, yep.
And I was in Tamworth, and cart machines used to skip from time to time. And when you have a festival that's called the Tamworth Country Music Festival, and the cartridge skips and says, you're listening to the coverage of 2TM's. And I was just like, oh, no, please. How do I do it? How do I stop this?
Oh, man.
And I was like, oh, fader down, music up. Yeah.
And so with the 20 years in radio, who would be the person in their respective job that you most admired?
I think admired the most, that had the right attitude and the care, and who I envied and still to this day do envy, is Damien Willoughby. He goes by the name Will, and I think to this day he's still looking after, like, head of digital, I think, for SCA.
What is it about him that you really impressed you?
Well, talk about great bosses. For a short time, he was my content director. We got on immediately. Professionally, we did not see eye to eye from a professional, creative level until I took a massive wedge of humble pie and went I was telling myself in my head, shut the fuck up for a minute in your head, Stephen, and just be quiet, because this person might have something of value. Something of value. It was a shitload of stuff that was valuable. It wasn't just one thing. He just magically said and things started to make sense. You know what he does? You know what he's really, really good at? He's not just good at giving you the answer straight away. And you go, oh, I'm going to take Will's recommendation on that because he's been working in radio for a long time. No, what he does is he improves the quality of the question that you're asking in order to get to the answer you actually need, not the answer you thought you needed at the start of the conversation. And when you watch it happen, you're like, oh. So talk about that magic trick and that connection. He's got it interpersonally, not just through the mic to the speakers. And anyone who's been, if you're a radio person, you're always a radio person. It never quite leaves your mindset and your approach to anything. It doesn't matter that the medium's changed or the audience has changed or the messaging has changed or the thing that you want to talk about or your care for the things you want to talk about has changed. It's still in you. So yeah, that's a happy thing, I think.
Absolutely. That's what this podcast is all about. Finding the transferable skills from what you thought was going to be your career for the rest of your life, being radio, and applying that to something that you might end up loving even more.
Yes.
And it's a beautiful thing when you find it.
Yeah.
Next time I'm on Main Street in Mornington, I'll go around the corner and I'll knock on 3MP's door and they'll say, hey, didn't we fire you back in 1997? And I'll go, okay. No, I'll just go to Grilled across the road. But yeah, maybe when you do it, you will have better luck and you might get that magic hour.
I'll be like, just let me park the cars. I'll do anything. Trust me. Just let me
The
go.
Beige Thunder.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time, Stephen. It's been a joy.
It's been so fucking awesome seeing you, man. I love you.
That was the awesome Stephen Walter-Gerrard. Hope you loved that conversation as much as I did. And if you think that the career frustrations that Stephen was talking about are exclusive to commercial radio, then best-selling author Mary Lou Stevens has got a thing or two to tell you.
These guys in suits with laptops showed up and told us that none of us had jobs anymore and we would have to reapply if we wanted our jobs back. And here's the number for the counselling service.
That podcast's waiting for you wherever you found this one. And if you know someone who you think would be a good guest for this podcast, I would love to know about it. Drop me a comment in YouTube or in your podcast app, or catch me on socials. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, or Blue Sky. Just search for the podcast name, Off Mic, Life After Radio. I'm Andy Marr, and may your best years be ahead of you. Our guest, Mary Lou Stevens, has a thing or two to... so close.